The part was a hydraulic pump drive coupling for a John Deere 7R330. It was not an exotic component. It was not a specialty item produced in limited quantities for a limited market. It was a working part on a working tractor in a class that John Deere had been manufacturing and selling to grain farmers across the Central Plains for years, and it had failed in the way that mechanical components fail, without warning at an inconvenient time, during the second week of April, when a 72-year-old Kansas farmer named Leonard Bauer had 3,100 acres of grain sorghum ground that needed to move. Leonard had called the John Deere dealer in Kingman on a Monday morning. The service manager had confirmed the failure diagnosis over the phone based on Leonard's description. He had seen the same failure on that model before, and the symptoms Leonard described were consistent. He said he would check parts availability and call back. He called back that afternoon. The coupling was not in stock at the Kingman dealership. It was not in stock at the regional distribution center in Wichita. The regional center had checked the national distribution network and located available inventory at a facility in Georgia. Estimated shipping time, 7 to 10 business days. Leonard said he understood and asked the dealer to place the order immediately. The dealer confirmed the order that afternoon. 14 days later, the part had not arrived. Leonard called Kingman. The service manager checked the order status and reported that the shipment had been delayed at the Georgia facility due to an inventory reconciliation issue that the distribution system had flagged. The order was still active. The revised estimate was an additional 5 to 7 business days. Leonard asked whether the part could be sourced from an alternate location. The service manager said he had checked alternate locations and the Georgia facility was the only one with confirmed inventory. Leonard said he understood. On the 22nd day, he called again. The service manager told him the shipment had cleared the Georgia facility 4 days earlier and was in transit. The tracking information showed it moving through the distribution network. Estimated delivery to Kingman, 3 to 4 days. Leonard noted the date and said he would call back at the end of the week. The part arrived at the Kingman dealership on the 28th day. Not at Leonard's farm, at the dealership. The dealership's service schedule had compressed during the 3 weeks of the delay, and the 7R was now fourth in the service queue behind machines that had come in after Leonard's and whose owners had been waiting as well. The service manager told Leonard the installation would be scheduled for the following week. Leonard asked if there was any way to expedite, given that his machine had been down for nearly a month during his primary planting window. The service manager said he understood the situation and that he would do what he could, but that he could not bump other customers who had also been waiting. Leonard's 7R was back in the field on the 34th day. He had lost 34 days of his primary planting window on 3,100 acres of grain sorghum ground. Not 34 days of inconvenience. 34 days of compressed planting that had required him to run his remaining equipment harder than he preferred, rearrange his field sequence in ways that were agronomically suboptimal, and accept later emergence dates on approximately 800 acres that his agronomist told him at the end of the season had contributed to a yield drag he calculated at between 11,000 and 14,000, depending on the price assumptions he applied. He did not call the Kingman dealer to discuss this. He wrote it in his notebook, the dates, the calls, the part status updates, the installation delay, the yield drag estimate. He wrote it the way he wrote everything, completely, without editorializing, with dates and dollar figures and the names of the people he had spoken to and what they had said. He had been keeping notebooks on his equipment since 1994. 29 years of service records, fuel logs, field notes, and repair histories, organized by machine and by year, on the shelf above his shop workbench. He had started keeping them because his father had kept them, and his father had started keeping them because a machinery dealer had once told him that a farmer who didn't document his costs was a farmer who couldn't know whether his decisions were right or wrong. The notebooks were not sentiment, they were evidence. Then he went back to farming the rest of his season and said nothing publicly about what had happened. That was in April. What happened in July was different. The same 7R developed a secondary hydraulic issue, a seal failure downstream of the coupling that had been replaced in April. Leonard called Kingman. The service manager said the seal failure was a separate issue from the coupling repair and that it was not covered under any warranty provision. He said the part was in stock locally and could be installed within the week. Leonard said he appreciated the faster turnaround. He brought the machine in on a Tuesday. He picked it up on Thursday. The repair cost $840. He drove home and sat in his truck in his equipment shed for a while. The April situation had been a supply chain failure, the kind that affects every manufacturer and every dealer network at some point, and that Leonard had, in the abstract, accepted as an unavoidable feature of operating complex machinery that draws on a global parts network. He had been frustrated. He had lost money. But he had not drawn a permanent conclusion from a single event, because a single event is not a pattern. July was not a pattern. July was a $840 seal failure on a machine that had been in the shop twice in 4 months. What July was, in the context of what April had already established, was a data point that joined others Leonard had been accumulating without organizing, the part's weight in 2021 on a different machine, 11 days for a sensor that the Wichita distribution center had been slow to restock. The labor rate increase in 2022 that the Kingman dealer had implemented without prior notification, which Leonard had discovered when his service invoice came in $340 higher than his estimate. The scheduling compression that had added 3 weeks to the installation time, even after the part arrived. Leonard pulled his notebooks from the previous 4 years. He went through them systematically, the way he went through everything, extracting every service event, every parts weight, every billing discrepancy, every scheduling delay. He built a table, dates on the left, machine on the right, event in the middle, cost and time impact in 2 columns at the far right. He spent 2 evenings on it. When he was done, he had a table that covered 4 years of service history across his full 6-machine John Deere fleet. The table showed what his instinct had been telling him since April. The service situation at the Kingman dealership had been deteriorating for 4 years in a way that was incremental enough to be absorbed individually and significant enough to be alarming when seen in aggregate. Parts availability had worsened, not dramatically, not in a single event, but consistently, across machine after machine and season after season, in the specific direction of longer waits and fewer alternatives. Scheduling windows had lengthened from 2 weeks to 4, and in peak season to 6. Labor rates had risen from $98 per hour in 2020 to $118 in the current year, an increase that the dealer had implemented without advance notice on 2 of the 4 occasions, which Leonard had noted in the relevant notebook entry, each time without comment. And the cumulative impact, measured in days of downtime, in operational rearrangement costs, in the yield drag from the April delay, had crossed a threshold that Leonard had not formally identified, but that he recognized when he saw the table complete. The threshold was the point at which the accumulated cost of staying exceeded the accumulated risk of leaving. He called the Massey Ferguson dealer in Pratt on a Thursday morning in August. His name was Tom Selby, and Leonard had met him once, 3 years earlier, at a county equipment meeting where Selby had been a presenter on precision agriculture integration with AGCO equipment. Leonard had sat in the back of the room and listened without contributing, and had come away with the impression of a dealer who answered questions specifically rather than generally, and who did not treat a room of experienced farmers as people who needed to be sold to rather than informed. Leonard had not been in the market then and had not followed up. He called now not because he was ready to buy, but because he had a question that he needed answered by someone with direct knowledge of the subject, and Tom Selby was the person he knew to call. The question was specific. What did Tom Selby's parts stocking philosophy look like for a 3,100-acre grain, sorghum, and wheat operation in Kingman County, and how had it performed in practice over the previous 2 years on comparable accounts? Leonard said he was not currently shopping for equipment, and that he was asking because the question mattered to him independently of any purchase decision. Tom Selby answered the question without trying to sell anything. He described his stocking approach, a tiered inventory model built around the failure patterns he had documented on the equipment in his service territory, with deeper stock on the components that his records showed recurring demand for, and a priority sourcing relationship with his AGCO distributor that gave him preferential access to fast-moving parts during peak season. He said the approach had been built specifically around the gap that regional distributor networks left in availability during planting and harvest, when demand spiked and the national network compressed its lead times in ways that hurt customers who couldn't afford to wait. He said he could provide Leonard with his actual documented response times on parts orders for the previous 2 years if Leonard wanted to see them. Leonard said he wanted to see them. Tom Selby drove to Leonard's farm the following Tuesday with a folder. The folder contained 2 years of parts order logs from his dealership. Not a summary, not a prepared presentation, but the actual order records showing part number, order date, arrival date, and the customer's machine and situation. Leonard sat at his kitchen table and went through the folder for 40 minutes while Tom Selby drank coffee and said nothing. The average parts lead time in Selby's records for in-demand components during the previous 2 planting seasons was 4.3 days. The longest single wait in the records was 11 days on a specialty component for a combine header. There was nothing in the folder that resembled the 90-day sequence Leonard had experienced on his 7R in April. Leonard looked up from the folder and said he had a question that was not about parts. He asked Tom Selby what would happen if Leonard traded his entire John Deere fleet, 6 machines, for Massey Ferguson equipment, and the first season produced a critical parts situation that Selby's dealership could not resolve within a reasonable window. What would Selby do? Tom Selby said he would give Leonard his cell phone number and his personal commitment that any parts situation affecting Leonard's operation during planting or harvest would be handled by Selby himself directly before it reached the 3rd day without resolution. He said he would put that commitment in writing as part of the purchase agreement. He said he was aware that written commitments were only as good as the person who made them, and that Leonard had no particular reason to trust him yet, and that the only way to build that trust was to perform against the commitment over time. He said he was willing to start that process if Leonard was. Leonard said he needed 2 weeks to complete his own evaluation before he could respond to that. Tom Selby said 2 weeks was fine. He said he would leave the folder if Leonard wanted to refer back to it. Leonard said he would make copies of the pages he needed and return the folder by the end of the week. Tom Selby said there was no hurry. He picked up his coffee cup, left the folder on the table, and drove back to Pratt. Leonard looked at the folder for a moment after the truck had left the yard. Then he went to the shop and got the copier he kept for field maps and started working through the pages. Leonard spent the 2 weeks building the comparison he needed. Fuel consumption data on the Massey Ferguson 8S265 and 7S190, sourced from operators he contacted directly through the County Equipment Association, not manufacturer figures, not dealer projections, but the numbers that actual farmers running the machines in comparable conditions had recorded in comparable seasons. Resale value trajectories on the MF8S series, drawn from 2 years of regional auction data he obtained from a sale barn he had used. Service record reviews from 3 Selby dealership customers he called with Tom Selby's permission, farmers who had been running Massey Ferguson equipment through Selby's shop for between 2 and 6 years, and who Leonard asked directly whether Tom Selby had ever failed to deliver on a specific commitment he had made. None of them said yes. One of them said the closest thing to a failure had been a parts delay of 8 days on a hydraulic component during the previous spring, longer than Selby had targeted, shorter than Leonard's April experience by nearly 3 weeks, and that Selby had called him on day 5 to say the delay was running longer than expected and had arranged a temporary equipment solution that kept the farm operational while the part was in transit. The farmer said he had not been happy about the 8 days. He said the way it had been handled had not made him less happy. Leonard wrote that in his notebook. He called Tom Selby at the end of the 2 weeks. He said he was ready to discuss a fleet trade. Tom Selby said he would come out Thursday. The trade agreement covered 6 machines. Leonard's full John Deere fleet, which included the 7R330 that had sat for 34 days in April, a second 7R, 2 SEM utility tractors, a 5M loader tractor, and a 5E that Leonard had been running for 11 years on his lighter ground. In exchange, 2 MF8S 265 row crop tractors, 2 MF7S 180 mid-range units, an MF6S 155, and an MF5S 125 utility tractor. The trade-in valuations were fair. Leonard had current auction data, and Tom Selby's offers were within a range that the data supported without negotiation. The personal commitment on parts response was in the agreement, in writing, in a paragraph that Leonard's attorney had reviewed and found to be specific enough to be meaningful. Leonard signed on a Friday afternoon in September. He called the Kingman John Deere dealer the following Monday morning. He did not call to complain or to explain or to give the dealer an opportunity to make a counteroffer. He called because he had been a customer for 17 years, and he believed that a 17-year customer who was leaving owed the dealer a direct conversation rather than a notification through the trade-in process. He told the service manager what had happened: the April delay, the July repair, the 4-year service history he had compiled, and the decision it had produced. He was factual and without hostility. The service manager listened. He said he appreciated Leonard calling directly. He said the parts situation in April had been a supply chain failure that the dealership had not been able to control. Leonard said he understood that. He said the supply chain failure had been the visible event, and that the 4 years of accumulated service data had been the actual reason, and that the difference between those two things was worth the dealer understanding. The service manager said he would share the feedback with the dealer principal. Leonard said he hoped it was useful. They ended the call without drama. The Massey Ferguson machines arrived over 2 delivery days in late September. Leonard walked through each one with Tom Selby's delivery technician, confirming the configuration against the purchase agreement and noting the service intervals that would begin the operational record he would keep on each machine in the same format he had kept records on the Deere fleet for 17 years. The first entries in the new notebooks were made the afternoon of delivery day. Machine identification, delivery date, hour meter reading, initial condition notes. The first season on the new fleet ran without a critical parts event. Tom Selby's dealership was called twice, once for a minor sensor fault on one of the 8S265 units in November, resolved in 2 days, and once for a pre-season service scheduling question in February that was answered the same afternoon. Leonard noted both events and the response times in his notebook. Neither event approached the threshold at which the written commitment in the purchase agreement would have been triggered. At the end of the first full season, Leonard ran his operating cost comparison against his 17-year average on the Deere fleet. The fuel consumption advantage on the MF8S.265 units was within the range the pre-switch comparison had projected. Repair costs for the first season were low, as first seasons tend to be, and Leonard weighted them accordingly. A single season of clean operation is a favorable data point and not a validated trend. What he was building was a record, not a verdict, and a record requires time to mean what it is intended to mean. What he already had, before the first season was complete, was the 90-day sequence documented in his April notebook: the call on the Monday morning, the 14-day wait that became 22, the part that arrived at the dealership and sat in the service queue for another week, the 34 days total, the yield drag, the dollar figure at the end. He had it in his notebook the way he had everything: complete, dated, specific, without embellishment. Farmers in Kingman County, who asked Leonard why he had switched his entire fleet, received a direct answer. He described the April situation, the 4-year service history, the comparison he had built, and the written commitment in the purchase agreement. He did not characterize the John Deere dealer as incompetent or dishonest. He said the supply chain failure had been real, and the dealer had not been able to control it. He said the pattern across 4 years had been what he had controlled: the decision to track it, the decision to take it seriously, and the decision to act on it when the accumulated evidence crossed the threshold he had set. Some of the farmers who heard the account had their own versions of the story. Parts delays that had run longer than the situation warranted, labor rates that had increased without explanation, scheduling windows that had compressed to the point where preseason service requests were being booked into the season itself. They had absorbed these events individually, as Leonard had, without drawing the conclusion that the individual events warranted. What Leonard's account gave them was a framework, the idea that a man who kept notebooks and built tables and made calls and did comparisons before signing a purchase agreement was not a man who had made an impulsive decision based on a single bad experience. He was a man who had given the existing relationship every reasonable opportunity to demonstrate its value and had made his decision when the demonstrated value no longer matched what the relationship required. 3 of those farmers called Tom Selby's Pratt dealership within the following 6 months. 2 of them signed purchase agreements. The third signed the following year. Leonard did not take credit for these outcomes. He had not campaigned for them. He had answered direct questions with direct answers, which was how he had always operated, and the answers had been specific enough and documented enough that they carried weight in the way that documented answers carry weight with men who understand what documentation means in the context of equipment economics. Tom Selby's written commitment on parts response sat in the purchase agreement file at the Pratt dealership. It had not been triggered. Leonard intended to ensure that it was never triggered by doing what he had always done, tracking everything, maintaining precisely, operating within the machine's rated capacity, and calling the dealer on day 1 of any part situation rather than waiting to see if it resolved itself. He had waited 90 days once. He did not intend to wait 90 days again.